In this lesson, we're going to think about another form of market. We've already sort of spent a great deal of time thinking about perfect competition. Remember on that number line, perfect competition was one polar, lots and lots and lots of firms. At the other pole, one firm. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a monopoly. Most people know what a monopoly is. It's a situation where one firm has control of the market. Formally, for us, our definition says that a monopoly is a situation with one supplier with no threat of entry. So that's kind of like what you probably thought when you first heard monopoly, one supplier. But it's key that we put the no threat of entry, because there can be situations where you see one supplier, but there could be, think about costs being staggered like, say, bleachers at an arena. And there could be one firm who has the only ability to produce at the cost that it's as low as the floor. But maybe there's a bunch of people who could produce at cost as high as the 5th row, and some that could produce at cost as high as the 10th row. That firm can act as a monopoly, try to raise price. It can't get above that 5th row, because once it gets to the 5th row, those people will now be active competitors. We want to rule that situation out. It's a real-world situation. And economists write about these things all the time and observing them in the real world, because that kind of is explained by several markets. But right now we want to think about this polar example. So we're going to say this firm has this monopoly and no one can take it away from them. Then we're going to figure out what that firm would do given that sacred position it's in. So what we want to start with is to think about causes of monopoly. And the first cause of monopoly is something called a natural monopoly. Economists use a natural monopoly to refer to a very specific situation that's typically brought about through things called economies of scale, economies of production. And so the definition is a natural monopoly is an industry where a single firm can supply the market at a lower cost than two or more firms. So what's an example of this? Well, there are a lot of them, but perhaps the simplest one is to think about the water company. Here in Champaign, as in just about every community, there's one water company. We grant that company a monopoly because it's more efficient to have one set of water mains running down a street than two. We could have the water company, and then I could decide to enter, say, with Larry's Fly-By-Night Water Company, but I'd have to lay a whole system of pipes all around town, water mains. I'd dig up every street and put my own main down there. It just doesn't make any sense. Other examples, pipelines. If we're going to bring natural gas from, let's say, Texas up to Chicago, the government will grant that. And so we'll talk about government grants. The government will grant that to just one company. There'll be a bid for it. Because it turns out, if you have to throw, let's say, if you have to throw a million, if you have to throw 1,000,000 units through a pipe, you could build two pipes that do 500 each, one owned by Larry and one owned by Bob, or you could have just one pipe that would do all 1,000,000. Well, it turns out it's much cheaper to build one pipe. The surface area of one pipe compared to the surface area of two pipes half as big, much more expensive to build two pipes in terms of the steel cost than to build just one pipe. And so there are situations where it's better to just have one firm. For many years in this country, if you wanted to make a long-distance call, there was only one place you could place it. Okay, the phone company, as we called it, or AT&T. AT&T had the complete natural monopoly rights granted by the U.S. government for all long-distance phone calls. And that's because, basically, there was just gigantic upfront costs to build this. Lots of copper. If you were going to make a call from Champaign to your cousin who lived in Missoula, Montana, that had to go on copper all the way. And that means somebody had to put a lot of money out front in copper. And so rather than having two sets of people with copper all over the place, Larry's phone company and AT&T, we just gave one, you lay the copper, and then everybody will get from you, and that'll be the minimizing the cost of production. Other government grants, sometimes you know these as things like patents. The government will oftentimes grant Monopoly power for a patent. A patent is a reward for some research and development, for some innovation, something that helps the quality of life, lowers costs of production, creates new products that makes everybody better off. We reward these inventors because it turns out that most inventions are very easily reverse engineered. Okay, so you may spend 2 or 3 years on making a production model that actually works. For example, when Xerox invented when the people behind the first photocopy machine, which eventually became known as Xerox, it took 3 years of trial and error to make that thing actually work. And it's estimated that nowadays that at that point in time, if you had put that on the market without patent protection, it would have taken a team of engineers locked in a room basically 5 days to figure out how to duplicate that machine and put their own on the market like we have today, where there are all sorts of different photocopy machines because Xerox's patent has expired. But at the time, we gave Xerox protection to recoup those investments. Finally, the third cause we'll talk about is control of a natural resource. Sometimes firms get into a position where they actually get their hands on a natural resource, which permits them to basically corner the market. We now have an idea where these come from. Let's think about how a monopolist would maximize profits. So our goal is to look at monopoly equilibrium. And that monopolist is going to maximize profits. And earlier, we established that the rule to maximize profits is to set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. And, we did that without putting any market structure on. We understood that that was the rule no matter whether you were doing monopoly, oligopoly, perfect competition, whatever market you're looking at, firms who want to maximize profits will set the marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. And so we don't have to go back and prove that. We've already done that. Let's think about our graph. I'm going to put cap Q here. You could put lower q if you want because lowercase q is the firm's output and cap Q is the market output. But in this case, they're the same. There's only one firm. They're the sole supplier. So if you want to use lowercase q, that's all right. I'm going to use cap Q because the firm is the market in this particular case. And we'll put a demand curve down here that looks like this. And we'll put a supply curve. It's not a supply curve. We'll put a marginal cost curve that looks like this. We're interested in finding marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So that marginal cost looks a lot like the marginal cost we've had in the past. So that's because the law of diminishing marginal products says that every firm is going to face these types of pressures on their cost curve. So we'll just draw one that looks like this. And we want to find marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And the interesting question then is, where is marginal revenue on this graph? Where is marginal revenue on this graph? And so to answer that question, I'm going to draw another picture. All right? On this picture, it's just going to have the demand curve. And I'm going to say that suppose at a price of $100, we sold 50 units of this product. There's a consumer standing right there. That consumer was the marginal consumer. At the price of $100, 50 units were sold. Now, marginal revenue says, what's the extra revenue for selling one extra unit? So now we want to think about the 51st unit. To sell the 51st unit, the monopolist is no longer going to be able to get $100. Because at $100, this is the last person willing to buy. The monopolist is actually going to have to lower its price to attract the next consumer on the line. And I realize this is a continuum, and I'm kind of drawing like it's integers, but you'll give me a little bit of flexibility here and say, suppose that consumer is $1 less. I have to drop the price by $1 to get this person to come in. So if I drop it by $1, the blue person comes in and buys it. So I've got 99 extra dollars for that unit. We're not worried about costs here. We're just thinking about revenue, marginal revenue. So is $99 the extra revenue associated with that particular unit of production? The answer is not really, see, because it's true that I'm getting $99 out of the pocket of that consumer, but look what happened. I am foregoing $1 on all those 50 people who would have paid me $100. By reducing the price in the marketplace to elicit that blue figure to buy, the monopolist says the only way I can sell Q1 is I've got to lower the price to 99. I'll get 99 out of that consumer, but I'm sacrificing the $1 out of the previous 50 people who would have paid me $100. So the marginal revenue of the 51st unit is equal to the plus 99 from that consumer minus the 50 that we sacrifice on the previous consumers. So the marginal revenue will be equal to 49, somewhere about here. And that's crucial to the monopoly. The intuition is the following, that for a monopolist, marginal revenue is always less than price. Because when the monopolist observes the current price, the monopolist knows that if they want to sell one more unit, since they're the only game in town, if they want to sell one more unit, they have to lower the price. The only way to sell another unit, because the demand curve is downward sloping, is to lower the price. But when they lower the price to that marginal consumer, they're lowering it to all the inframarginal consumers too. And so on net, they get the $99 out of the wallet of that person, but they have to net off the $50 that they're foregoing on the people who they could have just had their $100 out of their pocket if it wasn't for the fact that they lowered that price.